Welcome back in to the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where, like Doris Burke, we are also aware that the French and Germans do not always get along throughout history. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That over there is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Today, the new guard of sports announcers is here. The Dan Le Batard Show shuts us all up. But first, we're already starting to miss the NBA on TNT before it's even gone. Our thoughts on the broadcasting booth situations, just overall good vibes coming out of TNT and maybe less so on the opposite end of the conference finals. But Ben, you have a history lesson for us? You want to chime in on Doris's comments?
I don't. That's okay. I need to do some studying, but yeah, that was a wasn't expecting like a World War I and World War II reference during the Western Conference Finals.
I was not either, but let's just start it right there, because she and Richard Jefferson and Mike Breen obviously are calling the Western Conference Finals for ESPN. We'll get to the Reggie Miller, Stan Van Gundy, and Kevin Harlan trio on TNT later, but this was a big moment for ESPN, and it feels like almost every year we could say that because they recycle their talent in the booth and in the studio so often, but it felt, at least to me, Ben, like you have Doc Rivers leave midseason last year. You have J.J. Redick leave in the summer. Richard Jefferson had been waiting in the wings. You and I both expected that even though they wouldn't really say he was going to be part of the top group, that he would eventually get there, and here he is. Doris is now in year 2 as the top analyst, and Mike Breen just signed an extension that finally, for the first time since they laid off Van Gundy and Jackson 3 years ago, that this could finally be maybe their booth of the future. And I feel like ESPN was kind of hoping it could be, or at least giving it the space to become that. And I gotta say, it's just not working. It's not clicking. I have some thoughts on why, but I feel like seeing the discussion among fans online and things now, it's getting to almost a consensus that this booth is just not where it needs to be to not only be here, but they're about to call the finals, and they're going to continue to have the finals under the new contract. It has to be better than this, I feel like.
It just doesn't feel like the Eastern Conference Finals or the Western Conference Finals. It doesn't feel like the conference finals in general. Like, it doesn't feel like that level of basketball that it needs to be at. And it's interesting because I think Burke Magnus, ESPN's head of content, did an interview with Jimmy Traina probably at this point 6 months ago. And it was before they had decided on Richard Jefferson. And just reading between the lines of his comments in the questions that Jimmy was asking about, like how they were going to handle this booth, you kind of sensed that even though they knew Richard Jefferson was the obvious answer in terms of the talent they have available to them right now, he was very hesitant to commit any further than this upcoming NBA Finals to whatever the top booth was going to shake out as. And it wound up shaking out to be Richard Jefferson alongside Doris Burke and Mike Breen. But you look ahead and you look at all the moving pieces in the NBA media landscape. Richard Jefferson's contract is still up after this year, so that's another moving piece to all this. You just get the sense they're going to go big game hunting. You get the sense that they're going to go after a big name, and whether that's to pair with Mike Breen and Doris Burke, or whether that's just to pair with Mike Breen, I don't know at this point, because this booth, I agree, like, just does not feel like it's up to par when it comes to the Western Conference Finals and ultimately the NBA Finals starting next week.
My thoughts on why it's not working, because that's all the exact context that I've had in my head too, right? It's like Jefferson's young. I would imagine ESPN would like for him to be their future. Doris worked her way up here. Like, it's kind of like, this is your opportunity. Seize it. Like, I think ESPN's skepticism on it tells us that even though that's true, they weren't really sure. I think, like, so you've had in this series, you had the game where Richard in the intro bombed, and then the hot mic caught him saying, "I'm in suicide watch" or whatever. Obviously joking, but like he he's stumbling, he's correcting. It was like a 15-second blurb, and I think he made 7 mistakes. Like, just one of those things that you don't see happen on big-time sports TV almost ever. Then this game that I obviously was making light of, which was game 3, where Doris had the comments, or I'm sorry, game 4 last night, where Doris had the comments about, the Hartenstein versus Rudy Gobert stuff. Just weird. And she has too many of those, in my opinion, where it's like kind of supposed to be a joke, but it doesn't quite land, and it makes Mike Breen uncomfortable, or it just sort of starts going viral online for the wrong reasons. I don't know what it is. It's hard to be funny on TV. Yeah. I get that, but maybe it just will take time. But she also has these other kinds of comments at times, like the foul merchant thing with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, where it's almost like she wasn't aware of maybe the loaded kind of connotation of that term, which is like a very NBA Twitter BS thing that every foul merchant, ethical hoops, like the stupid wars over like who's really a hooper and whatever. Like, it's fun to talk about, but it's not necessarily something you would expect to hear from the top NBA analyst on a network calling a game, especially when it's not really referencing that online debate. And it just, again, it kind of landed awkwardly. Like, those are just mistakes, but I think that on top of that, is it crazy to say that Doris is deferring to Richard? That's what I feel like listening when I'm like, you're more experienced as a broadcaster and you're just a more veteran person around the game of basketball, even though Richard played. You're deferring to him, but he's not quite comfortable being the lead guy, and it just makes it almost like less than the sum of its parts. Like, it just constantly feels like this awkward dance where no one quite knows what the order of operations is going to be.
Yeah, it's a weird setup, and I think 3-man booths are really tough, probably for that specific reason, is like, what's the pecking order? And it's like, you knew a year ago with JJ, more so because JJ's such a dominating personality. And like, JJ,
he had no issue saying, all right, defer to me.
Yeah. I mean, JJ just dominates the broadcast. He's all over the broadcast. You feel him in every sort of way when he's on the call. And so I think they stumbled into it maybe where JJ like was the lead and then Doris could kind of chime in here and there.
Yeah, but I still didn't love that booth. Did you?
No, it didn't. Just none of these feel. It's so like you have this thing, right? We talk about this with Tom Brady, where you either need the credentials, like you need to be like, I am a Super Bowl winning quarterback, or I am a Hall of Fame level player, or you need to be really, really good, like Greg Olsen is, and like, or I'd put Stan Van Gundy in that category. Like Stan Van Gundy,
sure,
in terms of his basketball resume, is not somebody who should be calling the conference finals or the NBA finals. But I think Stan Van Gundy, and maybe to a lesser degree, Jeff Van Gundy, fit into that category because they are so good on air. This one, you have Richard Jefferson, who was effectively a role player for most of his career.
Yeah.
Doris Burke, who's obviously not a former NBA player, but somebody who I do think has established herself as a certain level of good, but maybe not that upper echelon level of a Stan Van Gundy, or, to use the football analogy, a Greg Olsen. So it's just, you're like, what's this booth bringing? Like, what's this booth bringing in terms of star power and high level analysis? I don't think you're necessarily getting either one right now.
It worked when Doris was with Doc. I actually thought that booth was really good because her confidence and efficiency and intelligence as a broadcaster shined through because she had a good reason to defer to Doc.
Right.
Because it's Doc Rivers.
Right.
So it's like
Doc has the credentials and he's really good. Like Doc's a NBA champion head coach, a Hall of Fame head coach, and he's really good. So like he fits both criterias, which sets up a natural pecking order.
And I don't know if they had a relationship through the years of her covering the league, but it felt like it. It felt like they had like a genuine relationship. And that's the thing. Like, we got spoiled, I think, even though you can make fun of There Goes That Man, and kind of the corniness of Mark Jackson at times, or the grumpiness of Jeff Van Gundy or whatever. But it's like, Well, we were spoiled because those two had an actual human relationship before they ever stepped foot on TV together.
Right.
It was the point guard for a head coach in the biggest market in the country. Like that was natural. But even like to move over to TNT a little bit, I feel like the Reggie Miller, Stan Van Gundy thing works pretty solid, even though those two guys don't really call games together during the regular season. And then all of a sudden in the conference finals, it's like, all right, hit the ground, like go time, just make it work. But it's funny because like Reggie also defers to Van Gundy in that situation a little bit more. Like Reggie's on top of it when he's the only analyst. He's like almost a second play-by-play guy. Him and Harlan have great chemistry. But even you notice it with him. It's like the people who have the most experience breaking down the game always just end up sucking up the oxygen, even if it's not for the better of the broadcast. But I think Van Gundy's just better than Richard Jefferson. If somebody's going to be deferred to, it just works better when it's Stan Van Gundy. So I think there's something to be said for it works better when there's a coach. I think the star power thing is absolutely true, or just a real tape grinder. But I also, I do think it's worth coming back to the three-man thing in general. I don't really get why, like kind of to look forward a little bit to me, these other networks that are loading up, I think it makes for a worse broadcast. There's already so little time in an NBA game to talk. Why are you shoving another voice in there? I think as a viewer, I just get bothered by it almost more than anything because it's too conversational. It's too tit for tat. It's like, just tell me what's going on and be quiet a little bit.
Yeah, and I think when it works, like it did with Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy, when it worked like it did with JJ Redick and Richard Jefferson for the brief amount of time that they were calling games together with Ryan Ruocco, like I think it's really great, but it feels like now we've reached this point where it's the default, where like networks feel like we have to have a three-man booth. We have to fill the role of the ex-coach. We have to fill the void of the ex-player. Like we have to fill all these roles. And it's like a two-man booth works fine. Like it's like we need a
even
second.
For college.
Yeah,
they do it. They put Grant Hill and Raft together once the Final Four comes around. It's just goofy.
Yeah, it's like we need a second apron for these networks where it's like, hey, you guys are going to have to now pick between Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Like you can't have, like, it's like we need to save the networks from themselves, because I think ultimately you give them access to star power and you say, hey, like you could have Reggie Miller and Stan Van Gundy on your broadcast, even though that's an example we like it's like they're not going to say no. Like they have the money. And so they're going to go out and they're going to get as much talent and as much perceived star power as they can.
Well, you talk about money and star power. I think ESPN needs a salary floor. Go make it happen. Like I do think that they're waiting to big game hunt. I don't know. I feel like Doc Rivers would have been fired already. I don't think the Bucks are going to start a head coaching search on June 1st, right? Or whatever. So at this point, it's probably not going to be him. There was some is Steve Kerr going to be there at some point? To me, it's just he's not obviously this summer, and they're about to start this new deal. Like they just need to get solid. Maybe Michael Malone saves them from themselves because he's in the studio right now. I don't even know if he would be good at doing games. Maybe they can convince Bob Myers to focus on that more, travel more. I mean, I'm a fan of a team who just tried to hire him to be their GM, and he didn't even want to move from LA to Phoenix. So I don't know if they can convince him to do that, but we talk about all these other ways, and I know people can overlook the game broadcast, and everybody says, oh, the numbers don't show that there's any difference between who's calling a game. But like all these conversations about getting back to the basics of NBA conversation and new face of the league and this turning point, inflection point that the league's at, like I do think it's bad for the sport to have such flux at ESPN overall. And when you just look at the names that are being hired that we're all excited about at these other networks, even Reggie Miller, why couldn't you steal Reggie Miller if he moved, he went to NBC, he had to figure out a new landing place. Why could you not just go get him, do the Inside the NBA thing or the Manning cast thing or the Pat McAfee thing and just steal the best people other places if you have to,
I was surprised they didn't make a run at Dwayne Wade. I thought like Dwayne Wade kind of like encapsulated everything that ESPN traditionally looks for when it comes to its analysts.
Yeah, so I hope they figure it out. There are there do seem to be some holes on the other rosters of broadcasters at NBC and Amazon where Richard Jefferson could still slot in. But I just can't imagine that they roll into next season with this crew. Not to mention the people below them. They had Corey Alexander and Jay Billis doing NBA this year. They called Tim Legler back from the military, the military reserves. He's on his couch, and they're asking if he can still bend his limbs and come do some fighting on the front lines. Like it's crazy. I don't know how they're so behind, and it doesn't feel like they're any closer watching this series.
And I saw a report about him probably playing next year, but it feels like maybe they're really hopeful that Chris Paul is going to be great at broadcasting.
Yeah, he just started a media company that apparently he's involved. Connor Shell is involved, I believe, from who used to work at ESPN, and that signaled to me maybe he would retire this year.
Yeah,
if you're launching the media company, that seems like a sign that the end is very, very near. But I don't know. He would be great, though, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if I told you next year it's Mike Breen and Chris Paul calling the finals, like that doesn't seem like too far out there, right?
No, and that would probably be good. It probably would feel better.
Yeah.
I think Chris Paul would be awesome, and he's Chris Paul, that means something when you see him on TV on the stand-up on the court before the finals with the logo in the back. Like I can picture that, and that I care if I see that. You know what I mean?
The Richard Jefferson piece of all this too is pretty interesting to me because I was somebody who thought he'd be really good in this role, and I still think he's good as a traditional analyst, and he's somebody I look forward to calling games that I'm watching. But it feels like it just felt too rushed. Like this rise for him, for somebody who's not a Chris Paul level player, he shouldn't be going for, I mean, he's like 3 years into this and now he's calling the finals. Like he has not been doing this on a traditional TV front for that long of a time. And so it just feels like as like an audience, we haven't built up that relationship with Richard Jefferson that you kind of expect to on a broadcaster's journey up the ranks. And so I think when you factor that in, that's what's missing with him.
And I'm not sure if he knows if he wants to be more of a Mark Jackson or more of a JJ Redick, right? Like I'm not sure if he fluctuates. In the studio, he's more goofy. On his podcast, it's a little more shooting the shit with Kendrick Perkins and Channing Frye. But then, obviously, he's smart. He played in the league for like 20 years. He knows his stuff, but he doesn't always go there. So I think, and chemistry is just so important. Like I think it's inarguable. But yeah, I mean, not to always every time we talk about announcers return to Greg Olson, but it is just a reminder of why he is such a freaking unicorn. A receiving tight end being the smartest analyst in football makes no sense. It should be like Richard Jefferson. We should be going, Greg Olson's kind of getting there, whatever. Not two-time Sports Emmy winner guy who we think is better than Tom Brady. It shouldn't be like that. So maybe that's a lesson as well. Kyle Hamilton of the week, Ben. You ready? I'm
ready.
Something that has become overused, and we're really just going to beat a dead horse with this ESPN broadcast here. I didn't realize I was doing that, but it was going to be the Kyle Hamilton either way. Something that is such a minor tidbit that's interesting the first time, but by the 50th time, you just start to wonder why it's being repeated so often. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, MVP, Thunder, guard, and backup bench player on the Timberwolves, facing off in the conference finals, guarding one another oftentimes. They are cousins. And if you've watched a lick of the Western Conference Finals, you've probably woken up in the middle of the night going, oh my God, they're cousins, because they cannot stop telling us that factoid.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'm just glad they're actually cousins, because I know there was a situation, I think involving Syracuse basketball back when Dion Waiters played for them, where it was him and another player who was on the Orange who called each other cousin, and everybody just took it as fact that they were cousins, and they weren't actually cousins. And so the fact that I just had to Google it real quick to make sure you weren't making a mistake. They are in fact cousins, correct?
They are. Though then the last name, it's in a different spot on the hyphen for either of them, but the Alexander is there. They're both
I've never
Canadian.
seen that before.
Yeah, I don't know how you choose where to put it. I've never been in that spot, but yeah, the Syracuse thing absolutely feels like the type of thing that out of touch old reporters would come into a locker room and they would absent-mindedly call themselves cousins once, just kind of like, oh, we're brothers, we're friends, we're this and that. And then the next day at practice, they go, oh, how does it feel to have your cousin on the team? And those guys are just like, dear God, I guess we're running with it. I guess this is our family tree now. Okay. Kyle Hamilton of the week. We got to take him when we get him.
Yeah.
Let's get into it, Ben. Our under 45 sports announcer draft. So for some background, Joe Davis last week, the sports Emmys are not any sort of big deal. Frankly, I don't know if the regular Emmys are anymore.
Having worked in local television, let's just say there's some maneuvering when it comes to the Emmy selections. There's some.
Oh yeah, the regional like daytime Emmy stuff is just crazy. Sometimes the people I see who say they've won an Emmy, I'm like, you're 31 and you don't do anything. What is happening here?
Yeah, me leaving 7 years of local TV without a local Emmy is actually like a huge blemish on my resume.
Yeah, you should have one. You could put it in your Twitter bio. Emmy-winning staff writer at Awful Announcing. So Joe Davis won the play-by-play award. He was the youngest guy to get it since Joe Buck. Kind of nice symmetry there that Joe Buck obviously was pretty much had Joe Davis's job and got it, I believe, at age 32. And Joe Davis is a little older than that, 37. This award normally goes to super elderly people, like, Al Michaels, or I always forget the hockey guy who he won it like 8 years out of 10 or something, who used to call hockey for NBC Sports. I can never remember his name. It's for the legends, Mike Breen, Kevin Harlan, it's those people. But so Joe Davis winning it kind of got my wheels spinning, because I think you could make a pretty reasonable case that he is going to be one of the defining announcers in the country before long, if not already. He is the MLB lead, calls the World Series for Fox, which I think is why he won it. He had that historic Vin Scully ode call in Game 1 when Freddie Freeman hit the grand slam. He also is the number 2 with Greg Olson on Fox, who we just mentioned. And he calls the freaking Dodgers locally for Spectrum, which doesn't exactly get a lot of attention in terms of people watching if you're not in LA, but that's the most high-profile baseball job right now, and it's Shohei Ohtani, and it's Mookie Betts, and you're in the headlines all the time in a huge market and everything else. So I was toying with, like, should I write a column on this, whatever, but then I was realizing we're kind of in this transition period, I think, where the young guys we know who they are now. Like, the next generation is at least at a point where we can identify them. Not saying the old guys are going anywhere yet, but I mean, look, Al Michaels is going to be gone before long, and we can say the names. These guys are going to be the dudes we're talking about, the dudes who narrate all the great memories we're about to have, and on and on. So I thought, let's talk about all of them, and what better way to do it than to draft them. So the idea here in the draft, Ben, is you want to make your picks. You could do whatever you want, but my thinking is, the people you're buying stock in the most. Like, this is like a dynasty league here. This is like, who do you think is going to matter the most in 5-10 years? Not just they had a cool viral call and we liked how it sounded and that's fun, but like we're being investors here. Okay. So I already said one of the guys who may or may not go number 1. He's the inspiration for it. But I'll let you pick first, and you can go where you want.
Why don't you go first? Because I'd feel bad taking Joe Davis here after you just told me.
Okay, well then I'll take him. I'll take him because I think but I want to hear how you feel about that idea. Like, I'll just jump off right here. I will say that how Fox feels about Joe Davis is better illustrated on the MLB compared to Kevin Burkhardt than the NFL. And I know it can get a little awkward when you take your colleague's job, but it would not be the first time we've seen it. And I would not be surprised if Joe Davis is number 1 on NFL before long as well. I personally like him more than Kevin Burkhardt. And Kevin Burkhardt does the studio for the World Series, whereas Joe Davis calls the games. Like, I don't know how that'll plan out over time, but if I'm being an investor about it, I want my money. I could have a Super Bowl and a World Series within 4 months in the next few years with Joe Davis.
Yeah, it feels like he already has like such a high floor. If we're going to talk about this in terms of like draft prospects, like you already know you're getting the best baseball announcer. So like, just like scratch that off right now. You're getting the number one baseball announcer from a national standpoint, as well as the local announcer for, like you said, the most high profile team in the entire league. I think it's an interesting push and pull with where his future is. Is it in football or is it in baseball? Obviously he can do both, but like, I think
more money in football.
Yeah. Well, so ideally you would want the football announcer because that's more high profile. The NFL is king. But on the flip side, like, Fox's top football announcer isn't necessarily the top football announcer. Like, you're still competing with CBS. You're still competing with ESPN. You're competing with Netflix and Amazon at this point. Like, it's like, you're just kind of one of 4 or 5 top football announcers. Whereas like Joe Davis doesn't have a peer right now. It seems like in baseball. So to say all that, to factor in that he's the number 2 football announcer at Fox, which is probably like the de facto top football network in terms of broadcast partners, I would say. Factor in the Dodgers, factor in that he's only 37. Like, yeah, I think he is the clear-cut number 1 here.
So if you want football, which you kind of hinted at, I feel like you're going a different direction than I would.
Yeah, that's what I was that's what I was toying with as I was looking at this, is like,
because we only got one other guy on our like kind of cheat sheet here that is in line to potentially call a Super Bowl in the next like 5 to 10 years, as far as I see it.
Would that be Noah Eagle?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Noah Eagle is where I was going to go with the number 2 pick. Just because of the versatility in terms of all of the sports he calls. I mean, you look at this: college football, NFL, NBA for NBC, NFL for Netflix. And these are high profile gigs he's already getting. Like, he's not getting, like, he's not just starting out in this thing. He is like firmly well established in the rotation, calling nationally televised games, high profile nationally televised games. He's only 28 years old. Seems like he has a firm footing in the new NBA landscape. And then, yeah, just the upside to potentially call a Super Bowl. Like, I kind of want that with my number 1 pick here. So whether it was Joe Davis or Noah Eagle, that's where I was going to go with whoever was left. So I'll take Noah Eagle.
Prediction for Noah Eagle: he calls the YouTube game week 1. NBC's producing it. He's done the Nickelodeon and the Netflix. Like, he's kind of the young guy NFL announcer, and he already called the Brazil game last year because he was on the NBC team to do that. So that feels almost like a no-brainer, and then that'll just be another thing on his resume. Okay. I'm going Ryan Rocco.
That's who I wanted.
He is the lead announcer on the NCAA Women's Championship and the WNBA. He kind of quietly got demoted on the NBA at ESPN this year, down from the number 2. That became Dave Pasch because he was preoccupied with his other stuff, and ESPN wanted to spread the wealth a little bit. But he still calls NBA games. And then, of course, the Yankees for yes, which is probably number 2 to Joe Davis, although his schedule is probably more sporadic. He's not the everyday because he has so many other things he's doing. But that's pretty high profile as well. He's already called like almost 10 WNBA. Like, he got in with the women's basketball stuff back when it wasn't so glamorous, but now he's in the spotlight calling massively rated, very, of interest games. And he's still young, so NBA, ESPN would be stupid to like fully disband him from that. It wouldn't be insane to think he takes over for Breen someday if it goes that way. So, no football here, so that's a weakness. But he's as high profile as they get for somebody who's not even 45 yet.
Yeah, my introduction to Ryan Ruocco was actually through his podcast with CC Sabathia. I think RC2C. And what struck me about him, and I wasn't very familiar with him at this point in his career. I wasn't covering sports media either. But what struck me is that, like, he was such a personality, and you don't necessarily get like personality and opinions from play-by-play guys. And so then when I found out he was a play-by-play guy, and like, not only like he was one of all these names, just kind of like play-by-play guys, like you learn about them and then they just seem to be everywhere. It's like, oh, wait, Jason Benetti calls college football too? Like Jason Benetti calls the
Yeah.
like these guys just have like every gig in the like they seem unavoidable once you discover them. And so once it came out, like this guy's just calling like every basketball game that's not the number one game on ESPN that week. Like it's like, wait, he's play by play. He seems like he could be an analyst, like the way his personality is. So I really like Ryan Ruocco. That would have been my pick.
Who is your next pick?
My next pick is going to be Michael Grady. Kind of because of what I just said is once like you learn about these guys who are up and comers in the play-by-play ranks, they just like it's momentum based or something. Like they just like their stock skyrockets and they seem to be everywhere. And Michael Grady, like it was one of those names you hear about and it's like, oh, this is an up and comer. He calls the Timberwolves. He's starting to get more ESPN assignments. And then it's like, oh, and he's getting a new deal where he's going to be calling WNBA games too. And so the fact that
for both
right
NBC and Amazon potentially, which I think is worth, we didn't really talk about that on the show at all because it's not beneficial, but that really caught me off guard. He's not really a person who calls WNBA games. Now all of a sudden he's going to be like, he might even be more defining than Ruocco because the networks are all going to alternate the finals and some of the big series. And he's just going to be every time that it's not on ESPN, it'll be him.
Yeah. So that's like, I was trying to come up, like do my whole spiel about him and I couldn't like put my finger on where should I describe he works at because he works at so many places at this point. So I like the upward trajectory. I like that he's involved with the WNBA because I think especially just as we continue into the Caitlin Clark era, like that's only going to eat up a bigger piece of the pie. And so I will, as much as I wanted Ryan Ruocco here, I'll happily take Michael Grady. I think it gives me a lot of the same things.
One sport announcer, but two leagues, and seemingly multiple networks coming up here. So I like it. Is the WNBA the fourth most talked about league in the U.S. right now?
So it would be NFL, college football, NBA. I think WNBA at this point. At this, we'll see how,
right?
We'll see how Caitlin Clark's quad heals. But I also something I just wanted to throw this in there. There's been a lot of talk about like could the WNBA lose momentum with this Caitlin Clark injury? When you look at the calendar, they play the Liberty on June 14th on ABC. I think it's a Commissioner's Cup game. If that's Caitlin Clark's like first game back and it's an ABC showcase against the reigning champions, like that's going to do monster numbers, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I mean,
like this could be a blessing in disguise.
For sure. It's a soft point in the schedule for her to like in terms of the national profile in terms of her missing time. Every game of theirs is national, but there's levels to it. And this one is this pocket is not so bad. How much betting on the W have you done? You seemed really, really locked into some of the wording there.
I worked on Memorial Day when the injury came out. So I was doing some digging into the schedule and because they do miss.
I just wasn't expecting to hear a Commissioner's Cup name drop. So I was like, how much, scrolling through game lines have you been doing lately?
I should see if I can get a good futures bet on the Fever now with Caitlin's injury. Maybe there's some overreaction among the general public.
She went down to second on MVP. I saw that. So,
oh boy, get it while you can.
All right. I'll go with more of a personal favorite for my next pick here. There's two people who work for the same network and once worked locally for the same network here that are kind of the next two, I think. But Adam Amin is where I will go. Him and I think the last guy who will get drafted here are both basically stuck behind Joe Davis, which is part of the problem.
Yeah.
But I'm holding out hope that Adam Amin I've plugged this every chance that I get. Every time we talk about college football announcing, I say, I don't see a reason why he can't be the number one guy at Fox on college football before long. The Adam Amin, Mark Sanchez booth of my dreams here as somebody who probably watches one or two Fox college football games a year. I have that strong of an opinion about games I do not watch, but I think that opening is there. And we know he was a pretty high-profile NBA guy at ESPN before departing for Fox. He calls the Bulls games for the Chicago Sports Network locally, which ranked high on our awful announcing broadcast rankings, which people can check out on the YouTube channel. And I think he's just well liked and really good. So I don't see why he wouldn't continue to get jobs, even if right now the stock's not quite at the highest point that it has been.
Yeah, it's you and I did a video for our YouTube page breaking down the top NBA local broadcast teams as voted on by awful announcing readers, and the Bulls were in there, and we always joked about their degree of difficulty that they have calling those games, and the fact that the Bulls broadcasts like have earned such high marks despite maybe you get a Josh Giddey half court game winner like once a year, and that's where you can really kind of showcase your stuff. And that's what they did. They made the most of that opportunity. So, as somebody
calling DeMar DeRozan mid-range footwork for 5 years is not exactly glamorous, but they do a good job.
Yeah. But as somebody who watches a lot of college football on Fox, because Ohio State typically is playing at noon and typically gets the Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson booth, I would definitely be in favor of your proposal, is what I would say.
I mean, they seem to really like Klatt, but the Gus Johnson part is probably the least popular half of that duo. So maybe that's where Amin could slide in. I'm going to be watching a lot more college football this year. ASU is dangerously well regarded in some of the early preseason stuff that I'm seeing, whether it's draft prospects, power rankings, Big 12 preview coverage. I'm not used to paying a single ounce of attention to anything related to my alma mater's college football program in May. But if I'm this invested in May, come August, I'm going to be all in. So I think I'll be able to help you out more on that side of things this year.
I've got a Sun Devils take here, and it's that Kenny Dillingham, their head coach, has just like turned into one of my favorite personalities in the sport. And he's admittedly not somebody I was familiar with. I mean, if we're being honest, probably until the college football playoff. Like I wasn't sure walked in to the Sun Devils until they were playing Texas. But I follow him on X now. And he's 35 years old, which like I was probably around your age when Sean McVay got a head coaching job and was like 3 years older than me. And you're like, oh, wow, that's kind of crazy. Then you actually turn that age and you're like, holy shit, how is a 31-year-old an NFL head coach? Like, that's insane. And so the fact that this guy is 35 and running a Power 5 college football program, let alone one that played in a playoff game this year, that's insane. And then two, he every day, maybe not every day, at least once a week, he retweets this article from Mike Farrell. Mike Farrell is this longtime college football like recruiting insider. He was with Rivals forever. I think he's broken off and does his own thing. And he wrote some offseason story that's like 10 teams to watch for that could fall off in 2025. And of course, Arizona State's on the list. And without comment, without any additional context, Kenny Dillingham just retweets that article once a week, just like as motivation or fuel or whatever. And I love that for him.
He has a little bit of Ted Lasso kind of, whatever energy, but we love him here. He basically has single-handedly pressured the university, the athletic department into spending any money at all on the program, which is why he will be a legend forever, no matter how far they go, because he's actually given us a product to watch. So yes, shout out Kenny Dillingham. Honorable mentions here, Ben. We'll just run through. I'll list them all off. You comment as you want. Alex Faust, we kind of use roughly under 45, under 50, whatever. He is MLB for Fox, kind of right behind the Joe Davis, Jason Benetti. Like he's kind of an alternate for some different things. And then a bunch of stuff in the Northeast. He called like the YouTube MLB stuff in the past. I believe he does the Apple TV games from time to time. Brendon Glasheen, not just because he has my all similar first name, but he was the lead guy for Unrivaled at TNT. He does Celtics, Connecticut Sun in the WNBA. He's a fill-in all over. I think he's done some Red Sox. I should say Faust does NHL a lot. Lisa Byington, Milwaukee Bucks locally, the lead announcer there. She's one of the people in the rotation for the NCAA tournament for CBS, and then she does Chicago Sky locally, WNBA for the Chicago Sports Network. And then Chris Whittingham, Apple TV soccer guy, Apple TV Plus season pass for MLS, and then different UEFA, Serie A, random soccer rights that CBS has one of their top guys as well on the way up in the soccer world. Those are probably not draftable, but they are part of the changing of the guard that we're talking about.
I don't think I got my third pick in. I don't think.
Oh crap! I had it on I saw it on the list, so I knew where it was coming, but the audience didn't get to hear you wax poetic about the last guy.
Well, so it would make sense for me to do Jason Benetti here because I do agree, just in terms of like where he's at in his career, he's probably the a step above the names you just listed. And I was actually the one who suggested him when we were putting this together off air. However, I will pivot as a good co-host, and I will take Chris Whittingham to help set up our next segment. Because I think a lot of us are most familiar with Chris Whittingham from the Dan Le Batard show universe. He was a short time executive producer there, longer time personality in general, just on the show. I think he was responsible for a lot of the more fun running bits that they had on the show, but he is like a very emerging voice in the soccer play-by-play field. I mean, he's calling, Champions League games, high-level games. And so a little bit like my pick of Michael Grady because of the WNBA aspect, like I do think there's a lot of upside in having a soccer guy a year before the North America hosts the World Cup, and it helps us set up our next segment. So I will take Chris Whittingham.
Yeah, Benetti is boxed out a little bit. He was the other guy I was referencing on Fox, but he's risen to be their number one on most of their college basketball, men's and women's. So that's a nice slot, but they don't have championships or anything. So I don't think you're crazy to think Whitty could be calling a high-level game sooner than Jason Benetti, even though he is one of those people, like you mentioned, that is just absolutely everywhere on podcasts and interviews all the time. But Whitty is rising up the ranks, and younger. I think he's only like 32 or something. Okay, so as Ben teased, our final segment, the Dan Le Batard Show and Meadowlark Media renew their deal with DraftKings. This was talked about, I think we covered it a couple of weeks ago, amid a series of departures from the company, including the CEO, John Skipper, who was also a co-founder and former president of ESPN. They're expected to scale back on their unscripted and scripted programming, which never really flourished, I think, in the way that they had hoped that it would. We'll see how that goes as time continues. And the titular co-host of the show, John Stugatz Wiener, has also kind of, I think, scaled back not only his appearances on the main show, but he took his two podcasts, his interview show and his NFL and college football show, God Bless Football, into his own independent oversight and management. He started a YouTube channel and everything. So a lot of change, but this is a soft landing, I think you would have to say, to stay with DraftKings, get another 3 years of some kind of income. I think the amount has been not quite reported on in the same way that it was when it was a big flashy 50 million the first time. So I don't know what that necessarily tells us, Ben. But the other part of this is they're kind of scaling back even as a podcast network, which you and I had discussed last time, that a lot of the smaller shows just never caught the way that I think that they had hoped with the popularity of their surrounding cast, who you just mentioned, somebody like Chris Whittingham, for instance, like that they could just launch a show with these people and it would become a major player that could bring in ad revenue and be part of the mix for them. It seems like I don't know about abandoning that, but this deal apparently will mostly focus on the Dan Le Batard Show, South Beach Sessions, which is really an offshoot, an interview show that he does, and then David Sampson's sports business show, which is called Nothing Personal. What did you make of all of this coming together, which they had been insisting was coming on air, in leaks? This, don't fret, like our company's not ending. This is going to come. And now here we are.
I always figured they would be remaining with DraftKings. It was just a matter of what it would look like. And the biggest tell for me in that was that it seemed like DraftKings wanted it out there, that they wanted to stay in business with Meadowlark and with Dan Le Batard. Like, even as they were cutting back, they ended the Golic show. They ended the Trey Wingo show, and it would have been easy to like lump Le Batard in there as a similar category. I mean, there's some overlap on some of those shows. And so the fact that like DraftKings put it out there pretty quickly that they were still talking to Dan, they were hopeful to get a deal done. Like to me, that indicated like if they want to get a deal done, then I think Meadowlark will find a way to get a deal done. Obviously, like we talked about last time, it definitely raised some red flags when you had that week in which Jessica Smetana goes back to New York. The report comes out about Stugatz scaling back with the network. And on top of that, John Skipper, their CEO, it comes out that he's no longer with the company. So like that, I think if you listen to our segment on that from a couple of weeks ago and like we were a little bit more negative, I think that was justified. And I think like it definitely like it made you wonder like what's going on with this deal and what's going on with these negotiations. But I'm ultimately not surprised that they're staying, and I do think it is a good fit for them. Especially, because I think Meadowlark, when they hit the ground running in 2021, they wanted to do a lot of things. And that also fit in with what DraftKings wanted. Like DraftKings wanted to do a lot of things. DraftKings wanted, to fill out their programming schedule. And now it seems like both of them are kind of scaling back. And so my hope is that, like we said last time, it allows them to focus on the main show. Hopefully it helps them kind of get back to basics when it comes to that sort of stuff. But I thought the other interesting part is the reporting that had come out surrounding all of this was that Meadowlark wants to focus on the Dan Le Batard show with Stugatz and Pablo Torre Finds Out. And while Pablo Torre Finds Out is still underneath the Meadowlark banner, it's not a part of the distribution deal with DraftKings now.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, we've talked too, even separately from the Le Batard show, about the DraftKings, FanDuel, the sportsbook licensed content era, which definitely peaked around that 2021 timeframe when they got their deal, and how that just isn't really the infrastructure of that. It's not really there anymore. There's still major sponsorship dollars going around, but this idea of like people are going to tune in to some kind of live stream channel from a FanDuel or a DraftKings or anyone else, that's just never really came to pass. In my opinion, it never really made sense. So you go from there to, okay, it sounds like this is going to be more of a traditional sponsorship thing. They cut back on their in-house productions. I know that like the Ross Tucker show, I was able to email him back when they cut the Wingo and Golick show. He got re-upped. I talked to him about that. Good follow. I was able to confirm with DraftKings and Meadowlark that their women's sports show that they launched in the past year or so, that's continuing. They have a deal with All the Smoke that's more of a licensed sponsorship thing, but not a production. It doesn't even seem like ad sales because Matt Barnes has his own company for that. So like DraftKings can't abandon this because FanDuel and others are still putting pressure on them to, you can't abandon your marketing or you're going to lose market share even more when FanDuel's already the top. But they can't spend like they did. And I think that makes sense. The part about Pablo's show, which we've talked about a lot on our show recently too, from a different standpoint with all the Belichick reporting and his girlfriend and everything, is that he had spoken at the time that he left ESPN and joined Meadowlark to launch this show about the kind of not cautionary tale because it hadn't happened yet, but the reservations that he had about really trying to do journalism, which he cares about, obviously, from all the publicity around the Belichick reporting, but have it be funded by a gambling company. And like the pitfalls of, can you do a story on sports gambling addiction? I don't know if you can. I don't know if he's tried or how that went, or I don't know, but he talked about that. So that's why I feel like it's fair game to mention it. And so I don't know if that's part of why this split is happening. Cause you'd think, right? Like Pablo's show is on its way up.
Yeah.
Like it's getting more attention than it's ever gotten. The audience has been really good for a lot of the episodes around the Belichick stuff. He's on the map. He's getting referenced in major publications and doing interviews on national outlets and platforms. Like, you'd think if you're DraftKings and you have a relationship there, you'd be stupid to not attach yourself. So it seems more like it might have been a Meadowlark / Pablo call to split a little bit. Does that sound like where your head's at on it?
That's what would make the most sense to me. Is that's like if I'm, Meadowlark, if I'm Meadowlark and I come out of these last 4 years and it's like, okay, like we did some stuff, some of it worked, some of it didn't. One thing that really worked was Pablo Torre finds out, to the point that it feels like not an equal to the Dan Le Batard show, but it's definitely something like that you can go out there and get its own deal from. Like it's not something that should be wrapped into a DraftKings deal, just like as a throw-in. And maybe it was a matter of like DraftKings saying we're only willing to go this far, and Meadowlark saying, okay, that's fine, but like in that case, Pablo Torre finds out cannot be a part of the deal because we know we could get X amount somewhere else. And maybe that played a role in some of Stugatz's stuff going independent. Like all of this is kind of connected, but that's what would make the most sense for me. Is I can't imagine why DraftKings wouldn't want that show. And I could also imagine why, if you're Meadowlark, why you would want to sell it separately, because it is such an established entity at this point.
And it's not some like when we had talked about the successes and failures of that era of kind of that licensed content and the huge deals getting thrown around. It as an example of something that just recently did get a new big deal from a gambling company, Bussin' with the Boys. Mm-hmm. That's the type of thing that DraftKings and FanDuel should be spending money on. The Le Batard show is kind of on the edge, in my opinion. Clearly, they've had a beneficial relationship or they wouldn't have re-upped. But Pablo's show, they're not going to plug my picks for the week and crap like that. So I think that it was never a great fit, and this might be an opportunity to kind of sell high as Meadowlark and diversify a little bit, so all of your revenue is not coming from this one gambling sponsorship deal. But you know where go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say along those lines, did you listen to Dave Portnoy on Club Shay Shay?
Most of it, yeah.
Okay, so he went into what happened with Bussin' with the Boys. And so what happened was Barstool has an exclusive DraftKings deal. And so Bussin' with the Boys contract comes up and FanDuel offers them a massive sponsorship. And so it's not like this was a sponsorship from a liquor company or from Nike or someone where they could have taken it and stayed on Barstool, because Barstool's with DraftKings. And so basically Barstool having this all-encompassing exclusive DraftKings deal has almost left them susceptible to getting their talent poached by FanDuel specifically, because, and other gambling companies, but I think FanDuel has definitely emerged as the chief rival here. They can come in and offer a big sponsorship deal and make a choice. And so you do wonder if Pablo Torre finds out had remained under a DraftKings deal whenever their contract came up, could that leave them susceptible to somebody like FanDuel coming in and making an offer? But I do think it's more likely, like you said, I think that is a area that Pablo doesn't really, it doesn't seem like he's necessarily comfortable with. But I do see like that interview was just very enlightening when it came to the downfalls of these all-encompassing deals for these companies, because it does leave you susceptible to that kind of stuff.
Now that Barstool has gotten out of its own way and stopped saying gross shit on air, they're super fascinating, and everybody should be paying much more attention to them. I think Dave is pretty damn smart and doesn't get credit for that by his own fault, I think we all can admit. But again, now that, and he's running the place fully now, they don't have the CEO, Erica had left, and they're out of the pen stuff. Like, they're probably the thing I'm most interested in. But that conversation was, he always is super transparent, and I think it's helpful for people like us trying to get the industry, and fans at home who are trying to understand like why do people leave, or why do things change or whatever. But the FanDuel side of it with Bussin', that kind of came out of nowhere, because you kind of could have looked at it and we had done a segment saying, well, this era is ending, and then all of a sudden they said not so fast. But the last thing on Pablo. Another thing we didn't talk about on the show, because it was kind of hearsay in a bigger article, but Politico did a piece about the future of political media, and MSNBC was heavily talked about because they're undergoing some changes, breaking off from NBC and trying to be more digital instead of just the TV business, and on and on. And Pablo got dropped in there as a potential full-time third chair on Morning Joe, which he has regularly appeared on for a while. He's a paid analyst for MSNBC. He does some of their nighttime show, and he does Morning Joe from time to time. I wonder if there's any version of a partnership there I would think it would probably be for the worst if I were to just give my uneducated opinion. I think giving it to a corporate political media company in any way would probably dilute the product, but you can't really be the full-time political talk show host and put out a heavily reported, polished product like we know that is 3 times a week or whatever. I think it's 3 that he does now. So that feels like a kind of crossroads too, where we're coming up here for Meadowlark, for this buzzy new podcast that's gotten a lot of attention and won a lot of awards. And if you care about political media, which I frankly don't watch any of that stuff, it might be his face popping up a little more. So I couldn't help but think about that when this DraftKings deal came down too, and he wasn't fully a part of it.
That's interesting. I hadn't considered that. It would make sense. I think the MSNBC brand is not ideal right now, but I do think somebody like Pablo coming in like helps fix that problem. Like I'm a little bit like you. Like I've sworn off MSNBC. I was watching some of their election night coverage because that's what I tend to do is whichever side's losing, I like to tune into that side and see how they're coping. And they just weren't even like acknowledging the results. Like they weren't even like letting the public know what was going on. Yeah. It was very, I was like, wow. And so like, but it would make sense. Like if they're trying to reestablish credibility with people like me, like Pablo Torre is the type of person who could help them do that. But I do think like if I was Pablo, as wary as I would be of the gambling companies, I would want it to be a very loose affiliation, because I think Pablo's quote unquote brand and reputation's in a really good spot now. And I think like the way people get lumped in with MSNBC and the left leaning media on some of this stuff, like I think that could be damaging.
The episode he did on Miriam Adelson, for instance, last year when the Mavericks sale went through, I don't know how MSNBC feels about like a real dig in, not hit piece because it was fair, on a big Republican donor who's one of the more influential, like stuff like that he's been able to do. If MSNBC wants to put it on for an hour and put up some YouTube clips on their YouTube channel and let Meadowlark have full editorial control, maybe. But yeah, it's an interesting decision for him for sure. Hot mics, something that caught our attention, we liked or we disliked in the world of sports media for the week. I'm going to start off, Ben, because it's really a question for you. It's more, you brought this to my attention before I had listened to it, and you have more insight into it than I would. Bill Simmons was the first major media figure, major voice, and of course an NBA voice for sure as well, to really put on the record that the idea of LeBron going back to Cleveland again this summer. Now, it on paper, not insane, right? Like, there are some trades that make sense, and Shams Charania on Tuesday morning reported he expects LeBron to opt in, so the whole go on the minimum, that idea is almost already dead, although it's not dead until he officially does it. But there's some trades that work there, and they just lost, and the Lakers are Luka's team now. The Cavs lost, the Lakers also lost. The Cavs lost is what I mean, disappointing fashion after a great season, and the Lakers are turning a page to a younger, Luka-centric team, and this might be LeBron's last year. Farewell tour. Would be great to do that in Cleveland. How seriously are you taking this as one side of the spectrum compared with just something to talk about all summer because LeBron gets clicks and a return would be a cool story, but it's not going to happen?
I'm not taking it seriously. Like I've really given up on the idea of LeBron. Like I think he likes living in LA. I think he likes playing for the Lakers. I think he likes living in LA. I think that there are definitely aspects of these last 7 years of his career now, 8 years now, it hasn't all been about basketball. He's given up some of the basketball stuff to live in LA. Now, I think playing for the Lakers always gives you a chance, and maybe Luka Doncic just falls into your lap. And if you can figure out the center position this summer, then you have a chance at a title. But like, I I've given up on that. I really know a lot of Cavs fans, obviously, and I know a lot of them who every time something goes wrong, and especially after they have a disappointing exit from the playoffs, the first instinct is got to get LeBron back. Got to find a way to get LeBron back. Got to, everyone romanticizes the idea of him finishing his career here and making one last run. I think that's out of LeBron's view. I don't think it's something he's interested in. I think he's a Laker for life at this point.
Am I naive to think too that there's an element, because the easiest way for anything like that to happen this summer or next summer or ever for LeBron or anyone in his boat would be to go take a huge pay cut and then you can basically do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Am I naive to think that these guys, they obviously care about money for their own sake? But I've always bought a little bit the standpoint that, like, we went through this with Chris Paul in Phoenix, where he wasn't going to play ball, taking too much of a smaller salary toward the end, and that's why they ended up they were going to cut him, they traded him for Bradley Beal, whatever. But the conversation came up with him too, like the precedent-setting nature of taking less money. Do you think these guys care about that, or is that just a nice story to tell when they just take as much money because they like to live in mansions and it's cool to get $50 million?
I think until we have a great example of somebody doing it, then I think it's always going to be the way it is, I guess.
Well, yeah, but I guess I'm just trying to read the mind of why, right? Is it just because they want their money, or do you think there is something to the standpoint of for the play, almost like the labor aspect of it? We're not ever going to allow that precedent to be set, that because the media would fawn over it. LeBron is this humble guy going back. And then it's when Kevin Durant doesn't go to Washington for his last year, he's never going to do that. But then it's well, LeBron did it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I actually do think there's something there, but it's also kind of an easy out to give a guy where it's I'm almost making it a good thing that he's taking $50 million. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there in terms of the players' ego, and in terms of this is my stature in the league. I am a $50 million player and I will only play for $50 million. And I don't know if that's individual to each player. I don't know if that's the collective mindset. I don't know how much of that has to do with the players association, but you would think LeBron is past the point of the players association. LeBron could say, hey, this is my career. This is what I want to do. I'm going to go back to Cleveland. I've made $1 billion in my career, and winning one title in Cleveland would mean more to anything than any amount of money I could make elsewhere. That's the part I have a tough time squaring away, is why isn't that a viable thing? But until I see somebody do it, all I can do is just assume that these guys are only going to play for what they're actually worth.
What's your hot mic?
I've been saving this one. I knew I'd get to this one eventually, and the College Football 26 cover got released earlier this week. The trailer's coming out on Thursday. Are you a video gamer? Do you play video games?
Not much.
Okay. I'm a lifelong video game player. I am always playing some sort of sports game, and I go through phases. And I went through a big NBA 2K phase. I've gone through Madden phases. I've gone through a FIFA phase. I liked college football video games growing up, but it was never my go-to. It was always just something I kind of played in conjunction with my Madden franchise to get the draft prospects. College Football 25, the one that came out last year, is my favorite video game ever. I'm having a tough time putting it down in anticipation of the next one coming out. It's the first time, I guess this was a thing back under the old iteration where people would do these online dynasties with their friends. I'm in 3 online dynasties with 3 different groups. They all have different personalities. I have different teams in all of them. All of the teams are at the point where they are all comprised completely of fake players. Yet these teams still mean something to me. Even as we've all reached this point where we're all getting ready to go on vacations, and nobody can play every day at this point. So now instead of a season taking a month, a season might take 2 months or 3 months. I'm still at this point where I want to see these guys I recruited progress. So I don't know. Whatever it is in this college football video game and in this franchise has me totally hooked. And I just have to give its due.
I love it. I want to shout out, I don't know if you caught wind of this at the time, but it's taking me back to a very COVID memory when Ricky O'Donnell from SB Nation did the Western Illinois basketball dynasty.
Yeah.
And I think he won it. He gave himself 40 years, and I think he won it in year 38, which was 2044, 2045. And he did a newsletter about it. I'm also seeing that there was which just again, very, very COVID. This got written about in the Washington Post that he was doing this. So yeah, I think I was going to ask you why you liked the game, but I figured it was the dynasty mode and building out the, not just playing like, a regular season head-to-head kickoff with Ohio State for the 9,000th time.
No, I actually, so you get a full schedule, right? And you play X amount of games. And in your dynasty, like some of those games will typically be against other people in your dynasty. And like, I dread having to schedule those games, like, especially as somebody who has 2 young kids and has to deal with bedtime. I'm not somebody who's going to like play during the day. So I have to play at night, and like, just to schedule those games to be like, hey, it might be 9:30, but I'll see how bedtime goes. And I've never run into an issue. And like, if you do run into an issue, not the end of the world, but I just dread having to do that. But yeah, just like the community aspect, we all call each other coach. We all know each other's players' backstories. We all like know each other's like recruiting. I have an affinity for Texas State University, which I never, like, I didn't even know there was a Texas State University until.
Where is the main campus?
It is in San Marcos, Texas, which
yeah.
I believe seems like maybe it's close to San Antonio. But I have an affinity for the Bobcats. Have to decide because so the thing is, you start as a smaller school. Like, that's kind of the rule, is you start as a smaller school and have to build yourself up. And so as we get here to the start of July 7th, to the next game, I'm going to have to decide like which small school I'm going to start with. It'll probably be a couple, cause I'll probably do a couple dynasties.
It's like the most extreme version of fantasy sports ever.
It's nuts. It's anytime I try to explain it to anybody, it's just like, it's insane.
So you figured you'd explain it to the largest audience of people that ever hear you speak, and that would be better. But probably this audience is more likely to understand your insanity than maybe your, close family and friends. So I respect it. That will wrap us up for the week, guys. We're here for you every single Wednesday, so hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. We're also at awfulannouncing.com covering this stuff, breaking it all down minute by minute, and on social media, X, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, Threads, everywhere you are, we are there as well, and we will catch you next time.